Hi everyone! In this video, I'm going to show you how I made a to-do app with Django. And the reason I wanted to start with a simple app like a to-do app is just because I think it's a good way to learn a new piece of technology. So let's get started by first showing you the final result I got. Okay, here's what I have. As you can see, the UI is super simple. We have the header that says my to-do app, and then we have a list of to-do items. For example, get a haircut, learn Django, and watch Crazy Rich Asians. And if you want to add a to-do item here, you can just click here and then type in your to-do item. For example, let's say to-do or new to-do item and click add, and then it gets added right here. If you want to mark some to-do items as done, you can just click this button, delete, to delete these items. And that's basically all we have. Now, I'm going to show you how I made this really simple web app, but let me just quickly recap the setup process first, just in case you haven't seen the first two videos in the series. So first, we used pip3 to install pipenv, and then we used pipenv to install Django 2.1. And we did that in this folder called Edit Dojo, and of course, that's just the name of our project. And after that, we typed pipenv shell to go into the virtual environment, and then used this command right here to create a new Django project. After you go through all of that, you should be able to just type in python -py run server to make sure everything worked. So just copy and paste this URL in your browser. You should be able to see either this or a 404 error like this one. Actually, either one is okay for now. You're gonna see one or the other depending on your progress in this project. Okay, so whichever one you see here, let's get started with our to-do app by creating a new app. So to do that, create a new tab in your terminal app or a new window in your terminal app. And then go into the virtual environment by typing in pipenv shell, and then create a new app with python -py start app, and let's call this app to-do. After you run this command, if you run ls, you should be able to see this new directory to-do. And then to install this app to-do in this Django project, just go to your text editor, open settings.py within Edit Dojo project, within Edit Dojo, find installed apps, it's right here, and then add to-do at the end of this list. Okay, next, let's create a view for this app. So go to the to-do folder, and then open views.py. And here, write this first. From django.http, import http response, and then you can create your view here by writing def to-do view requests return http response, and let's just say hello, this is to-do view. And then let's connect this to a specific URL by going to urls.py within Edit Dojo project, and import the view that we just created by writing from todo.views import to-do view, and then in URL patterns write path to-do / and then to-do view. If you go back to your browser and then type in the root URL / to-do, you should now see this, hello, this is to-do view. So this is exactly the same as what we did in the last video for our Hello World project. Okay, so right now what we're doing is we're using a view to show a text or a string. But that's not very useful, is it? We want to be able to show more complex information. And that's where the concept of templates comes in. So templates are basically sort of like a combination of HTML and Python. And you can use templates to show more complex information. And you'll see an example of that in a minute. Okay, so to demonstrate how you can use a template, let me just create a template here. To do that, first create a new folder within our root directory Edit Dojo by typing in mkdir templates, and then go into your text editor, find the folder that you just created, templates, and then create a new file here. We're going to call this file todo.html, and this is going to be our first template. We're going to keep it really simple for now. So within this file, just write h1, this is the ToDo Page, and then close H1. And in this video, I'm just going to assume that you're already familiar with HTMLs. And once you save this file, go back to the ToDo folder, and then find views.py again. And here, instead of using this simple text to create an HTTP response to send back to the browser, we can use that template to create an HTTP response as well. And that's going to be more convenient, as you'll see later. So to do that, instead of using this function, HTTP response, we're going to use this function instead, render. So make sure you have this line to import this function render. And then in ToDo view, write return render requests, and then todo.html. Okay, so once you have this, if you go back to the browser, you should see the content of todo.html, right? Well, actually, not quite. You should actually get this error, template does not exist. And that's just because Django, by default, doesn't know that it should look for templates in this directory, templates. So we need to tell Django about that. And we can do that by going into settings.py within Edit Dojo project. And then in this file, find this one, templates, and then find this section, DIRs. So this is going to be the directories Django is going to look for templates. So here, just write os.path.join base dir, templates. And this is just concatenating the base directory of this project with this folder, templates. And once you have that, save this file and then go back to your browser and refresh this page. You should see this. This is the ToDo page. And if you remember, this is the content of todo.html. Now, to make this page more like a to-do list, let's add a list. We can do that by going into todo.html and by writing this. So here I created a new UL tag, and then within that I created two li tags with these strings or text, temporary to-do item A and temporary to-do item B. Once you save this file and go back to the browser, you should be able to see something like this, the header with the list. Okay, after that, the next step is going to be to create something called a model. Models are basically Django's way of interacting your database. And just a quick note here that we're going to be using SQLite here. And to use SQLite, you don't have to do anything here because Django sets up SQLite by default. And here we're going to create a model representing each to-do item. To do that, go back to your text editor and then go to the to-do folder and find models.py. And here, just write class to-do item, models.model, and then content equals models.text field. So this creates a special type of class called to-do item, and this represents each to-do item in our database. And we're going to be able to use this class to interact with the data in our database. Right now, this class only has one attribute called content, but it could have multiple attributes. For example, content to represent the content of each item, which is going to be text. We could have, let's say, date created to represent when this item was created, and maybe author to represent who created this item. But for now, let's keep it simple and only have content here. Okay, once you have this in models.py and once you save this file, you're actually not done yet because you still need to tell Django to make changes to our database so that our database essentially knows about this class. And we can do that in terminal or shell. To do that, first write this, python manage.py make migrations. And this creates something called a migration file. And once we execute this file, we're going to be able to migrate our database to a new state. And a migration is basically a term that's used for changing the configurations of our database. So this is basically going to tell the database that we have this new model called ToDo item. To execute it, just write manage.py migrate. And then you'll see that at the last line here, applying todo 0001 initial, that's the migration file that we created. And you see a bunch of other migrations before that, but you can just ignore them because they're basically default migrations from Django. And once you run these two commands, python manage.py make migrations and python manage.py migrate, you are now ready to start interacting with this model. To do that, go into our Python shell by typing in python manage.py shell. And once you're in this shell, you need to import our class or our model with from todo.models import todo item. And then if you just write todo item here, you see this. And this just says, this is a class that's called todo.models.todo item. And then to interact with the database, you can write, for example, todo item objects.all. And this shows all the todo item objects that exist in our database. But none exists right now, so you should see something like this. This just says it's empty. So how can we create todo item objects, Python objects, and save them into our database? Let me show you here. So to create a todo item object, you can write todo item content equals, let's call this permanent todo item. Sorry, I misspelled permanent. Permanent todo item A. Let's just use single quotes here. And this object has been created. So if you write A, you should see something like this. It's a todo item object. But here, actually, it's not being saved to the database yet. To do that, you need to write a.save. And this way, this object A has been saved to our database. Let's do the same thing for two more objects. Okay, so here I created two more objects, B and C, which have the content, permanent todo item B and permanent todo item C, and I saved them into the database. And I'm calling these permanent because they're going to be in the database permanently. So at this point, if you use this command that we saw earlier, again, you should see something like this. You see three objects, and this one, and this one. What if we wanted to retrieve one specific object from this set? Well, you can do that by first storing the results of this query into a variable, let's say all todo items. And then if you write all todo items, square bracket 0, this is going to retrieve the first object in this query set. So write that and press enter, and you should see this. But it's kind of hard to see which one we are referring to, right? So to find that, you can just do all todo items, square bracket 0, dot content to show the content of this particular object. And this is permanent todo item A. Let's do the same thing for the two other items. So if you do square brackets 1 dot content, you should see this. And if you do 2 dot content, you should see this, permanent todo item C. Okay, and what if we wanted to delete one of these objects from our database? For example, this one, permanent todo item C, or all todo items, square brackets 2. Well, to do that, you can use the delete function, just like that. After running that, if you run this command again, you should only see these two objects because one of them has been deleted. Now, in the results of this command, todo item.objects.all, you see these, right? todo item object, parentheses 1. But what's this number? Well, it's the unique ID for each object that Django automatically creates for each object. So if you retrieve, the first object right here by writing this one that we used earlier, all todo items square bracket 0, you can retrieve attributes from it just like that. For example, the content attribute. But another attribute that Django automatically creates for this object is ID. It's 1, as you can see right here. And using this ID, actually there's a way to retrieve a specific object from our database using an ID. So if you want to, for example, retrieve the ToDo item object with the ID 1, you can write ToDo item dot objects dot get ID equals 1. And this is actually going to create a query to access this particular object in our database, and the result is this. And then if you store this result in, let's say, temp for temporary, and then if you type temp.content, you see that it's permanent ToDo item A. Now, I think watching, just this video is potentially confusing, just looking at these commands. So it's really best to, try creating a bunch of objects yourself and try saving them and, try deleting some of them and, try to get a feel of how this whole thing works. Anyway, in my particular environment, we have 2 objects in our database stored. Their IDs are 1 and 2, but their content are permanent ToDo item A and permanent ToDo item B. Okay, and what if we wanted to show all of those items, these 2 items in our website? Well, to do that, we need to go back to the views.py file that we were editing earlier. It's views.py within the ToDo folder. In this file, first add this line from .models import ToDo item. And just in case you're not familiar with this syntax, .models just means that we want to import this function to this class ToDo item from this file models.py within the same folder as this file views.py. And then once you import that, in the view function, we're going to say, once we get this request, then first retrieve all the ToDo items from our database. To do that, of course, we can write ToDo item.objects.all, and then we're going to store the result of that query into this variable called all ToDo items. And then we want to be able to pass this information, pass this list of ToDo items into the render function. You can do that by adding a third argument to this function. And that third argument is going to be this. As you can see, this is a dictionary whose key is this string all items and value is all ToDo items. This is basically saying we want to pass this information, all ToDo items, into the render function, and we're going to call that all items. And here's another way to think about it conceptually. We're passing this information, all ToDo items, into our template todo.html so that the template has visibility over that information. And then when we refer to that item or this list of items, we're going to use this name that we gave ourselves, all items. Okay, once you have that, we want to be able to show the list of ToDo items in our template. So go to the template file, todo.html, in the template folder. And then let's comment out the list we had earlier. And then create a new list here. Create a UL tag. And then within this UL tag, write this. So here I wrote curly brackets percentage for ToDo item in all items. So like we saw earlier, all items is what we are using here to refer to the list of items that we retrieved earlier from our database. So we're essentially running a type of for loop here, but in a special way. So here we're saying, for each ToDo item in all items, create this tag, this li tag, and the content of this tag is going to be this, ToDo item.content. And note that we're using double curly brackets here, and then end the for loop here. So this way, we should be able to show what we saw earlier in our terminal, permanent to-do item A and permanent to-do item B. So let's see if it works. Go back to your browser and then go to the URL that we saw earlier and refresh it. Okay, it worked. It says permanent to-do item A and permanent to-do item B. Okay, the next step is to add a form for adding a new to-do item right over here. To do that, go back to todo.html and then add this. Okay, so as you can see, I added a bunch of stuff here. Let me try and explain it carefully. First of all, I added a new form tag here. And then this form tag is going to go to this URL, the root URL / add to do /. So this is basically going to send an HTTP request to this URL. And then there are two major types of HTTP requests, GET and POST. But when we want to create something in our database, we need to use POST here and not GET. And this tag right here is what we need to add in Django just for security purposes. And then in the form tag, we have two input tags. The first one is the text type, because we need to type in text to specify what we want to put into our new to-do item. And we're calling this input content. And then the next input tag, the type of this one is going to be submit. This is going to be the submit button. And then it's going to have the add value, because it's going to have the text that says add on the button. So just to clarify this a little bit more, when the user submits this form that you're going to see later, the user's browser sends a post request to this URL, the root URL / add to do / with the data inside this form. And this particular data has only one attribute here, content. That's going to be text. So let's see how this form actually looks on our browser by going back to the browser or saving the file, go back to the browser, and then refresh the browser. You should see something like this. And actually, you are able to submit it already, but when you submit it, you're just going to get an error because Django doesn't know how to deal with this particular request. So let's go back and let's go to views.py to handle that. So this is again views.py within the to-do folder. So to handle that post request, we're going to create a new view here. We're going to call it add to do. So just like before, take requests as the input. And then what we want to do here is we want to create a new to-do item object. And then we want to save it. And once you save that object, we want to redirect the browser to the original URL that the user came from. And that's going to be /todo/. So let's do it one by one. First, we need to retrieve the content from the post request the user sent us. We can do that with this requests.posts square brackets contents. So this says in the post requests that we received, find the attribute that has the name content. So we can save this in a new variable. Let's call it C. And then using this, we can create a new item. Let's call it a new item. And then we can create it with to-do item content equals C, like we saw earlier. Actually, since this is pretty short, these two statements, we can combine them just like that. And after that, save this item with new item save. And then the last step is redirect the browser to /todo/. We can do this with return HTTP response redirect parentheses /todo/. And actually, we don't have this function imported in this particular file yet. So do that with this from Django.http import HTTP response and HTTP response redirect. Actually, we're not using HTTP response function here. So let's just delete that. And then we have just this. And after creating this view, we need to map the URL. This post request will be sent to this view. Let's do that in our urls.py file. So in URL patterns, create a new path. So we're gonna map add to do to the add to do function, and also import the add to do function here. Actually, since we're sort of repeating ourselves, I think we can just combine these two statements to just this. Let's see if it works. So make sure you save all the files, go back to the browser, refresh the page. Oops, I think I made a mistake somewhere. Let's see if we can find that mistake. So what I would do in this situation is I would just go back to the terminal and find the tab that's running the server, and find the relevant part of this error. There's a lot of stuff here, but I think it's this one. From Django.http import HTTP response redirect, cannot import name this from Django.http. So maybe I spelled it wrong or something. Let me just copy this and then just Google it. Okay, so just looking at this part of the Google result page, you can see that I probably mistyped this somewhere. Oh yeah, instead of writing HTTP response redirect, I wrote HTTP response redirect. Let's fix that and see if that fixes everything. Go back to the editor, go to views.py, I think, and then fix that, and then fix this part too. Okay, hopefully that's gonna work. Let's see. Refresh the ToDo page, and then okay, that's working. And then try adding a new item here. Let's say new item C. Click add, and it's working. New item has been added. Let's add a new item again. New item D, and new item A. All right, it's all working. Okay, once that's working, the next step after this, actually the final step, is to add the delete button for each to-do item. And this is actually going to be kind of similar to this add form, and you'll see why in a second. So go back to our editor, and then go to todo.html, and let's just sort of use this as a template for our delete form. So in this for loop, we're creating the li tags. Within this li tag, add this form, and then we don't need the text input because we only need to say delete. It's gonna have a single button here. So change the add value to delete, and then change the action or the URL that this request is gonna be sent to delete to do. And Django will need to know which item that we want to delete. We can tell Django about that by writing this. So delete to-do slash to-do item dot ID. And again, this is in double square brackets. So this part is going to be replaced with this particular to-do items ID. So for example, if this to-do items ID is 1, this request is going to be sent to slash delete to-do slash 1. And then I think I should add a slash at the end too. The method is still going to be post. We're still going to have this CRF token for security purposes. And then the input type is the same, submit, and the value is going to be delete. So let's first see how this looks by saving this file, going back to the same page, refreshing the page. And this is pretty ugly. Let's fix that by fixing the style of this form. So what I would do here is I would add a break line here just to make it easier to look. And then I would add a style equals display inline. So just to make sure, that's style equals display colon inline semicolon. And this should fix the style issue. Go back to the page, refresh. Yeah, it's much better now. And if I click this, it's gonna give us an error again because Django doesn't know how to handle this particular URL yet. For example, delete to-do slash 1. Okay, let's fix that by first going to urls.py within Edit Dojo project. So add a new path here after add to do. We're gonna call this delete to do for the URL. And here, what we want to say is we want to say if we get a delete to do /1, send that information to the delete to do function that we're going to create later. And then if we get 2, send that to delete to do 2. We can do that with this syntax: int colon to do id, and then close this. So this says look for an integer after delete to do /, and then give that integer a name, and that name is going to be to do id. And then we're going to send that information to the delete to do view, or the delete to do function that we're going to create later. We're going to create it in views.py in to-do, so we're going to import it here too. So once you have that, go to views.py and then create a new function here, and that's going to be called, of course, delete to do. And here, let's go back to urls.py for a second. Like we saw earlier, we had delete to do / an integer, which we called to do id. And actually, we can use this name to do id in our function. We have access to this integer as one of the arguments in the delete to do function, essentially. So once you have that, the first step is to select or retrieve the to do item object with this id, to do id. We can do that with to do item.objects.get id equals to do id. And then let's save this item in a variable called, let's say, item to delete. And since we want to delete that, we'll just write item to delete dot delete parentheses. And after that, just redirect the browser to the original URL /to do/. Okay, so if I typed everything correctly this time, everything should work fine. So let's see if it works. Go back to the browser, of course, and then refresh. Let's click this delete button. Okay, it looks like it's working. It's deleting these items. And then I can add more items, more, and then even more, and delete any of these items. Pretty neat, right? So obviously, this to-do app has a lot of problems. For example, it doesn't have any sense of users, so all the users share this, single to-do app, which is kind of stupid. And also, there's no error handling here. And actually, when you add an item or when you delete an item, it refreshes, the whole page, which is, kind of wasteful. So, obviously there are a lot of problems, but I think I wanted to, start with this project because I wanted to give you sort of an idea of how to, start working with Django, and I wanted to give you sort of an overview of how Django works. Okay, and that's pretty much all I wanted to show in this video. In the next video, I'm thinking of implementing, the signing with Twitter function, but we'll see. And if you're looking for, extra resources for Django, I recommend 2. One is, something I already mentioned in my previous videos. It's called Django for Beginners. It's a book that I recommend. It's at csdojo.io/dj. You can also find the free sample chapters at djangoforbeginners.com. And then another piece of resource that I highly recommend, which is a little bit more advanced, I would say, is the official Django tutorial on polls. You can just look for it by, I think, just by searching for Django tutorial, maybe polls. You can see, I'm not good at spelling here, but Google knows. And then just click this link, and it's really good. It's actually kind of slow and it goes through a lot of stuff, but I like how they break down things to smaller components as opposed to actually this book, Django for Beginners. But I think the best way to learn something, not just Django, but any technology, is to use a combination of multiple resources, like my videos and maybe this book and maybe this tutorial. So that's how I would go about learning Django. And another thing I wanted to mention is first of all, actually 2 things I wanted to mention. First of all, if you get stuck, at any point in this video, if you try to follow it, you should go to csdojo.io/edit to join our Slack channel to ask each other questions. I think if you ask questions in the comment section, you might get an answer, but it's much more likely to get an answer if you ask questions on the Slack channel. And the second thing I wanted to mention is that this video is actually part of a series of videos I recently started, where I try to actually start an actual startup. You can find the whole playlist at csdojo.io/start or in the description below in case you're curious. Anyway, thank you as always for watching my videos, and I'll see you guys in the next one.